Making the record. Fossils have been known since ancient times when Aristotle discussed them. However, the real meaning of fossils was not appreciated until much later. Within these petrified remains lies the history of life. In order to decipher that history, first you need to find as much fossils as you can, then you have to put them in order, from oldest to youngest, then you must find out exactly when they were formed. The formation of fossils is straightforward, but requires a very specific set of circumstances. First, the remains of an animal or plant must find their way into water, sink to the bottom, and get quickly covered by sediments so that they don't decay or get scattered by scavengers. Once buried safely in the sediments, the hard parts of fossils become infiltrated or replaced by dissolved minerals. What remains is a cast of a living creature that becomes compressed into rock by the pressure of sediments piling up on top. Once a fossil is formed, it has to survive the endless shifting, folding, heating, and crushing of the Earth's crust, processes that completely obliterate most fossils. Then it must be discovered. Taking into account all these requirements, it's clear that the fossil record must be incomplete. The total number of species that ever lived on Earth has been estimated to range between 17 million and 4 billion. We can estimate that we have fossil evidence of only 0.1% to 1% of all species, hardly a good sample of the history of life. Many amazing creatures must have existed that are forever lost to us. Nevertheless, we have enough fossils to give us a good idea of how evolution proceeded and to discern how major groups split off from one another. Ironically, the fossil record was originally put in order not by evolutionists, but by geologists. These early geologists simply ordered the different layers of rocks that they found, using principles based on common sense. Because fossils occur in sedimentary rocks that begin as a slit in oceans, rivers, or lakes, the deeper layers must have been laid down before the shallower ones. Younger rocks lie atop older ones. Since about 1945, we have been able to measure the actual ages of some rocks using radioactivity. Certain radioactive elements, radioisotopes, are incorporated into igneous rocks when they crystallize out of molten rock from beneath the Earth's surface. Radioisotopes gradually decay into other elements at a constant rate, usually expressed as the half-life. If we know the half-life, how much of the radioisotope was there when the rock formed, and how much remains now, it's relatively simple to estimate the age of the rock. Different isotopes decay at different rates. This actually enabled us to figure out the age of an igneous rock near the sedimentary rocks that buried the fossils.
After having the fossil record, now it's the time to put them in order. So for the fossil record, we start reading them from bottom to top, the bottom being the oldest and simplest organisms that arose around 3.5 billion years ago, after major biological and geological events. And as going to the top, we start seeing more complex and young species. The figure shows mammals and reptiles' very first appearance. This doesn't mean that they arose suddenly in the fossil record and from nowhere, because we see in the figure the gradual evolution from their earlier forms. For example, mammals and birds evolved over millions of years from reptilian ancestors, so we can assign the exact date to their first appearance due to the existence of gradual transition between major groups. Photosynthetic bacteria were formed after 600 billion years from the formation of Earth. After 2 billion years, we see simple eukaryotes with true nuclei and chromosomes. After 600 million years, we see jellyfish, worms, and sponges. After 400 million years, tetrapods and lobe-finned fish appeared. 50 million years later, amphibians were formed. Another 50 million years, reptiles arose. Birds arose 50 million years later. Mammals were formed 250 million years ago. Humans came around 7 million years ago. So if we compress the entire course of evolution into a single year, we see that the bacteria would appear in the end of March, and the first human ancestors wouldn't appear until 6 a.m. on December 31st. The golden age of Greece, about 500 BC, had occurred just 30 seconds before midnight. In this figure, fossil was taken from the ocean floor near New Zealand, gives us evolutionary change in the marine foraminiferan Globorotalia cnidaria over 8 million years period. The scale is the number of chambers in the final whorl of shell averaged among all individuals formed in each core layer. Since we don't have an idea about what selective pressure drove the evolution changes, but it's easier to document evolution in the fossil record than to understand what caused them. We can say that evolution was gradual and varied in both pace and direction. So the fossil record gives no evidence for the creationist prediction that all species appear suddenly and then remain unchanged. Instead, forms of life appear in the record in evolution sequence and then evolve and split.
Many today and in the past believe that birds came from reptiles, that land animals came from fish, and whales from land animals. Microevolution, however, sounds a lot more realistic to the eyes of many, in accordance to how we can see minor changes in size and shape over time. How could it even be possible that one entirely different animal or plant can come from another? This was a major problem in Darwin's time, as he had many people opposing his views on macroevolution. Macroevolution is the idea of how a completely different animal can come from another completely different one. Darwin's specific problem was that he could not find any transitional forms, which shows the intermediate states between ancestral forms and its descendants. Fortunately for us, paleontologists were able to discover these transitional forms in the last few decades. The evolutionary theory says that for every two species, no matter how different, there will always be a single species that was initially the ancestor of both. It is almost impossible to find these missing links due to the fact that our fossil record is extremely spotty. Although it may be difficult to spot out a specific link, we can find close cousins to this specific link. An example of this is reptiles and birds. Reptiles actually appear in the record before birds. With this info, we can safely say that birds came from an ancient reptile. Of course, with the knowledge that reptiles and birds contain similar anatomical structures. Back in 2004, the Tiktaalik rosé was discovered. The Tiktaalik rosé is a transitional form between fish and amphibians. This was one of the biggest fulfillment of evolutionary biology. About 390 million years ago, fish were the only invertebrates in the world, until 30 million years later, tetrapods came into the picture. These early tetrapods had many similarities to our current amphibians. They also had many similarities to our earlier fish known as lobed fin fishes, which contained large, bony fins which allowed them to lift themselves up from shallow waters. With that said, Tiktaalik was the link between the early lobed fin fish and the late amphibians. Tiktaalik had two extremely useful traits that helped to invade the land. It contained a set of sturdy ribs, and it also contained many small bones in the limbs, similar to land animals that arose later, which in turn, evolution proceeded on land.
Into thin air. To explain a transition between two species, an intermediate stage should be identified in the fossil record. One of the many evolving mechanisms that we know about is the development of wings for flight in birds from dinosaurs. One of the first stages in the development of flight is gliding. Gliding has evolved independently many times. Examples are North American flying squirrel, a placental mammal, sugar glider, a marsupial, and Draco lizard, a lizard. Gliding, or essentially flight, provides a new type of motility for the animal. This motility enables the animal to reach new food sources or survive predators. Animals such as a calago can glide 450 feet with minimal loss of height. Common ancestor, a missing link between 70 and 200 million years ago that can link between birds and theropods, the ancestral dinosaurs that walked on foot. This link was found in the 1860 Archaeopteryx lithographia. However, this missing link had more reptile traits than birds. A new missing link was found, and this time it had feathers. Cinorhinithosaurus milleni, first fossil to have feathers. This can be a huge intermediate between reptiles and birds. Feathers, most likely, wasn't used for flight, but helped maintain temperature, display, and possibly held on gliding. Traits like claws, teeth, and long bony tail existed in this fossil. In addition, theropod dinosaur behaved like birds. Back to the water. To show that whales evolved from a land mammal, we need to find a mammal that lives both on land and in water. A perfect example is the hippopotamus amphibius. Hippos mate in water, and their babies can swim before they learn to walk. On the other hand, whales get an A for their fossil record history because they live in an aquatic environment which is excellent for forming fossils. Whales are mammals, and their ancestors were the archaeopteryx. This was based on DNA and vestigial traits such as rudimentary pelvis and hinged legs. Whales are unique. Absence of rear legs, front limbs that are shaped like petals, flattened fluke-like tail, blowhole, short neck, and special ears that allows them to hear underwater. Intermediate stages. Endohyus is an artiodactyl that have ears and teeth that are only seen in modern whales. Also, it's partially aquatic land mammal. Pachyceros is more whale-like than Endohyus. This pattern continues in Ambuloceros, that means literally a walking whale, Rhodoceros, which has a more elongated skull, and had spent more time, if not at all, in sea. Basilosaurus and Dorantes are fully aquatic mammals that they had hardly spent any time on land, based on their biology from the fossils. That change was fast. The transition only took 10 million years. This was because the transition from land to sea did not require new traits or features, only modified on the old ones. Conclusion. There are many more examples of evolutionary evidence in fossil records. Fossil records teaches us three things. First, evolution. The fossil records show multiple evolutionary predictions that shows gradual changes and splitting of lineages. Second, transitional forms. Fossils would not show where they are predicted if evolution is not true. Third, evolutionary changes. Remodeling old traits into new ones was a pattern in many fossil evolutionary evidence.